It is 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Sir Keir Starmer suspends one of the Labour candidates for the general election over unacceptable comments on Israel, just a day after withdrawing support for his Rochdale by-election candidate.
It's a tough decision, a necessary decision, but when I say the Labour Party has changed under my leadership, I mean it.
Also tonight, Russia's top diplomat gives his verdict on how to end the war in Ukraine, claiming in an interview with Sky News that Russia cannot be beaten.
You admit that in order to get to what you're saying Mariupol is now, it needed to be destroyed in the way that it was by Russian forces.
They could surrender earlier than that.
The Body Shop, once a high street trailblazer, enters administration. A special report from Sudan shows the complete destruction of a once bustling marketplace in Omdurman after months of fierce fighting.
How are you this morning? Is everything working?
Tributes are paid to the master of broadcasting, Steve Wright, who's died at the age of 69. And we'll be taking a first look at tomorrow's front pages in our press preview. That's from past right through to midnight. Evening all. Sir Keir Starmer has said today that it was a tough but necessary decision to withdraw support for his Labour Party candidate in the Rochdale by-election after he made offensive comments towards Israel. He said it's his mission to tear out anti-Semitism from the Labour Party. And then just hours after, another bombshell when Sir Keir was forced to suspend a second Labour candidate, Graham Jones, the former MP who was selected to fight for the seat in the general election. Sky's political correspondent Serena Barker-Singh has our first report.
1 year ago, a speech to the party and a promise.
Anti-Semitism isn't evil, and no political party that cultivates it deserves to hold power.
But an old issue causing new problems for Keir Starmer. Azhar Ali, the party's pick for the Rochdale by-election, was caught at a meeting allegedly saying Israel allowed the Hamas attacks to justify invading Gaza. A day later, throwing the Rochdale race into even more turmoil, further anti-Semitic comments came to light, forcing Keir Starmer into suspending Azhar Ali, Labour withdrawing all support for his campaign.
I took decisive action. It is a huge thing to withdraw support for a Labour candidate during the course of a by-election. It's a tough decision, a necessary decision. But when I say the Labour Party has changed under my leadership, I mean it.
But how changed?
So it's the week after I've lost the general election. I've come down to Parliament.
The question again today, after another parliamentary candidate and former MP, Graham Jones, was suspended for comments at that same meeting, referring repeatedly to effing Israel.
It's completely wrong. It shows that although Keir Starmer has claimed that he's changed the Labour Party, in fact he has not.
I think the Labour Party have dealt with this very badly.
How complaints are conducted within Labour has been scrutinised by the left of the party.
I mean, it was obvious that the position that the party held over the weekend was going to be untenable. It just makes a zero tolerance line weak. It suggests it's zero tolerance for some and conditional tolerance for people in the leadership's faction.
What some people are trying to do is turn this into a factional battle, which it isn't. It's about saying, look, I took over a Labour Party that was anti-Semitic, that was broken, and I think what Keir Starmer once again has decided to do is actually sacrifice Labour having a candidate at this by-election to make sure that that mission continues to be executed with an uncompromising, ruthless and clear-minded fashion.
Lingering questions over how candidates who make inappropriate comments over Israel and Gaza can be selected in the first place. An issue firmly on voters' minds today in the Labour stronghold of Manchester Gorton.
I mean, I'd never vote for the Conservatives, but also Labour. I mean, if Keir Starmer's approach to what's going on in Gaza is a similar one, I wouldn't vote for either of them.
I don't think they can take a stronger stance, can you? Because if you look at the wider British public, they'll be like, we're struggling ourselves. So I think if they have taken a stance, that's good in itself.
I do understand why Starmer is dithering about, but nevertheless, I mean, under these circumstances, he needs to stand up.
So Keir Starmer out campaigning today is a reminder there's 2 by-elections ahead of Rochdale, key tests for the party and of his political judgment. Serena Bhagat-Singh, Sky News, Westminster.
Well, here is the full list of candidates and the political parties they represent in the Rochdale by-election. This, of course, after the Labour Party withdrew its support for Azhar Ali. Let's bring in Serena at this point. Serena, I mean, on a number of occasions, Sir Keir Starmer has said that he has stamped out anti-Semitism in the Labour Party. I mean, on the evidence of the past 24, 48 hours, I mean, that's demonstrably untrue.
Well, problems do seem to be mounting for Labour. I think they perhaps wanted to draw a line under it, under that suspension, after that suspension last night of Rochdale candidate Azhar Ali. But even last night, many within the party were questioning why this decision had come perhaps a bit too late. And what followed was whether Keir Starmer had the right political judgment on that as a result. Now, today, a former Labour leader, Neil Kinnock, he said the party's leadership sometimes lacked political savvy with its handling of recent crises and used Rochdale as an example. The fact that they allowed this to drag on over the weekend, that drip feed of bad news, and then today, another candidate in another seat, a prospective candidate, was a leaked recording found of expressing more inappropriate comments has come to light. Graham Jones, he's a former MP. Now, Keir Starmer says he's acted decisively over Azhar Ali's suspension. We understand that Graham Jones is also suspended pending an investigation, which has come much more swiftly than what we've seen in the past. But I don't think this will be the end of Labour's headaches. Instead, it seems like old wounds are resurfacing, political fallout. But crucially, Labour doesn't have an official candidate in the Rochdale by-election, a seat that used to be a very safe Labour seat.
Serena, thank you. Now, it's almost 2 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, with little sign of the war ending. Russia's ambassador to the UK has told Sky News that the invasion was necessary and claims that Russia and its enormous resources cannot be beaten. He was speaking with Yalda Hakim, who's this report.
The world's eyes may have turned to other conflicts, but war in Ukraine still rages on after almost 2 years. This was Kharkiv just a few days ago. Russia's ambassador to the UK says his country remains resolute.
Do you feel more confident than ever that Russia will prevail?
Russia cannot be beaten at all.
It's a stark warning, and the evidence of Russia's determination is also stark. The city of Mariupol, just one example, virtually flattened after a brutal 3-month-long Russian siege.
Yelda, go to Mariupol now. Look at it. It's a new rebuilt, totally rebuilt. It is amazing how beautiful it is.
But you admit that in order to get to what you're saying Mariupol is now, it needed to be destroyed in the way that it was by Russian forces?
They could surrender earlier than that. They could surrender Mariupol much earlier.
In 2022, Russia shocked the world when it bombed a maternity hospital in Mariupol, one of a series of alleged war crimes perpetrated by Russian forces. Sexual violence, torture, the deportation of Ukrainian children.
Do you admit that these sorts of war crimes took place across Ukraine?
Well, I'm sure that on every side, everybody, in this case, the Secretary General of the United Nations is saying that he condemns every crime committed.
I'm going to mention what Donald Trump, the former US president, says, and he says he'll end the war between Ukraine and Russia in 24 hours. Do you believe him?
At least Donald Trump is saying something about the end of the war, because all others, including Rishi Sunak, they speak about continuation of war.
Meanwhile, there's the threat of President Putin moving beyond Ukraine. On that point, Ambassador Kellen clear, we're not yet on the brink of World War III.
There is no interest in Poland or other Baltic countries, and we fully understand that any escalation beyond Ukraine will bring a world conflict, where a destruction of everything.
It's a marked change in tone from the Russians, all too aware of the consequences of all-out war with NATO. But of the war, which is happening, the ambassador seemed confident. Russia has no interest in relenting anytime soon. Yalda Hakim, Sky News.
Estonia's Foreign Intelligence Service has claimed that the Kremlin is preparing for a war with NATO in the next decade. Russia and the war in the Middle East has changed the way many countries are looking at defence, with a new report out today saying that record amounts of funding is being put into military resources around the world. Now, Britain is rehearsing for a conflict, as Sky security and defence editor Deborah Haynes reports.
The UK and its allies are mobilising as warnings of a conflict with Russia grow. Hundreds of British Army vehicles are off to Germany and then Poland, along with more than 1,500 troops. It's part of the largest NATO exercise since the end of the Cold War. And soldiers say they're ready for anything, even a hot war against Vladimir Putin's forces.
I'm ready for whatever the chain of command tells me to do.
Are you not nervous?
No.
Any message for Putin?
No, above my pay grade.
The various vehicles are loaded onto a ferry at a military port in Southampton. Commanders say it's routine business, but these aren't normal times. In fact, Estonia's spy agency is warning that Moscow is preparing for confrontation with the West within a decade, something a rapid rearming of NATO militaries could deter.
This exercise is designed to send a message to Russia that NATO's defences are credible. But given the shortage of weapons, of ammunition stockpiles and personnel, there is still much work for the alliance to do.
A report on the balance of global military power highlighted how Russia's war in Ukraine is changing the security landscape.
It has exposed fissures in Russia's armed forces, but also in the preparedness of the West.
The International Institute for Strategic Studies said NATO allies are rebuilding their defences after decades of decline. But there are glaring gaps, including for the British military.
Its medical capabilities are inadequate. More of its logistic capabilities, like the ability to move material by rail, are less than they ought to be. And that was a bit of an uncomfortable surprise for me.
It will be more than uncomfortable for everyone if large-scale conflict does return to Europe before the UK and its allies are genuinely ready. Deborah Haynes, Sky News.
Now, it was a trailblazer of the high street cosmetic industry here in the UK, the Body Shop, selling ethical products at affordable prices. But now, the company has entered administration, threatening more than 2,000 jobs and 100 shops, as Sky's Amelia Harper reports.
Behind these glass windows is a brand that once had the secret to high street cosmetic success. Fiercely ethical at its heart, refill, reuse, recycle was just one of the Body Shop's green credentials. But after almost 5 decades, its 200 shops could close.
I just feel like more shops need to be cruelty-free and animal testing-free, and they're really passionate about that.
It's quite sad news. My daughter's a keen shopper, as my wife. So it's sad to see Body Shop, which has been a sort of household name for, I don't know, as long as I remember now.
I think overall on the high street it will be a missed shop by many people, and it does have a lot of good products.
Founded in 1976 by environmental campaigners Anita Roddick and her husband Gordon, the brand exploded from a single shop in Brighton, here reaching New York. And it was this that she was rallying against.
You have thousands and thousands of ads telling you each day that your body is in need of repair, but mostly your face. And, it's got to be less damaged and it's got to be less of an illness like aging is, and here's a cream to do it.
By contrast, her ethical products and stance against animal testing was a unique selling point. It became a brand that everyone wanted, particularly women and girls. But the problems started to set in, and now a large portion of their 2,500 employees risk losing their jobs. Bought in November by private equity firm Aurelius for £207 million, it struggled to be competitive.
So over the past 30 years, the issues for Body Shop have really been an huge increase in competition within that ethical and sustainable space, and a lack of innovation. So you go into a Body Shop store and it looks largely the same now as it did 15 years ago. And because of that, people have moved on to other brands.
And there's more of that to come as the brand tries to stay afloat. Once a company with green values at its heart, it now finds itself deep in the red. Amelia Harper, Sky News.
It has been 10 months since Sudan's brutal civil war began, which has displaced millions. The latest conflict began last year when the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, launched a coup. Well, the paramilitary force, led by its commander known as Hemedti, has been formally operated by the Sudanese government. But they're now fighting the government's own armed forces, led by Abdel Fattah al-Burhan. The RSF has taken control of large swathes of the country, including most of the capital, Khartoum. For its part, the United Nations says more than 7 million people have been displaced since April, and at least 12,000 people have been killed. Omdurman is the last bastion of the Sudanese armed forces in Khartoum state. Our Africa correspondent Yusra El-Bagir is the first journalist to be given rare access to one of the city's most historic sites in Omdurman, its market, from where she sent this report.
A place once bright with life, hollow and haunted by the shadow of war. The only way for us to get here is in an armored vehicle. This one has taken its fair share of hits. A bullet aimed at the driver's head, trapped by the thick glass. The damage through the splintered windshield looks extreme, and in full view, the horror is complete. Only the force of war can obliterate like this. Collapse, rupture, and burn all at once, with lives forever changed in its wake.
This is Souk Omdurman, one of the most iconic marketplaces in the capital, if not the country. It used to be this bustling site of people pouring out of storefronts that have been owned for generations. And this is what's left of it. Bullet holes through buildings, shelled balconies, bullet cases on the floor, unexploded ordnance. It's just a wasteland. Unbelievable to think that this is what's left of a place that many people from Sudan remember so fondly.
We're told the Battle of Souk Omdurman ended little over a week ago, but fighting continues on its fringes. With every crossroad a reminder that snipers are still a threat. I ask how far the nearest enemy position is. I'm told around 800 meters away.
So after being told that the front lines are far off, we're now being ushered away after hearing very close gunfire.
There are no front lines in this conflict, only neighborhood battlegrounds. Pockets of fighting between the army and the Rapid Support Forces that grow or shrink on any given day. This is the culmination of months of urban warfare, a historic site left in ruins, largely cleared but barely walkable, evidence of the army's slow southward push, deeper into the occupied capital, where more death and destruction awaits. We head back to northern Omdurman, where there is life but immeasurable loss.
The war, it changed the people, and it changed the map of our life. And we can't even to think. We just want peace, want this war to stop.
While life here seems to continue as normal, the safety is relative. Are you used to these sounds, I ask?
When the bombing would happen, I used to get scared, and then I got used to it. But there was such intense sounds coming out of Omdurman at one point that I felt like my ear had been ripped out.
Their family and friends have fled their homes, but these walls give them sanctuary and relief. As the places they know and love crumble, each prayer fuels their hope for peace. Yusra al-Bagher, Sky News, Durman.
Israel has released footage claiming to show the leader of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, in a tunnel in Gaza. The military said the video was taken on October the 10th. That's 3 days after Hamas' attack on southern Israel. Sinwar has been described as the mastermind behind it and has led the organisation since 2017. Sky News has not been able to verify the footage. Police in India have used tear gas on farmers travelling on tractors and trucks to a protest in New Delhi. The demonstrators are demanding guaranteed protection against any fall in crop prices. Barriers of barbed wire and cement blocks have been erected to try to prevent them repeating what happened in 2021 when demonstrators camped on the outskirts of the capital. And a former post office worker convicted of fraud nearly 10 years ago is the latest victim of the Horizon scandal to be cleared by the Court of Appeal. Jacqueline Falcon, on the left in this photo, was found guilty in 2015 after trying to hide a shortfall at her Northumberland branch. Her conviction has now been ruled unsafe. The King has returned to central London, where he's expected to receive the next round of treatment for cancer. His Majesty and the Queen flew to Buckingham Palace from Sandringham in Norfolk, where they've been staying following his diagnosis. Our royal correspondent Rhiannon Mills has more.
In the sky over Buckingham Palace, the royal flight returning from Sandringham. The King on board with the Queen, likely heading back for his latest course of cancer treatment. We still don't know what that involves, but he isn't completely hiding away as he tries to balance his public position with some level of privacy. The fact that he's still travelling round in the Bentley with its big windows proves that they want us to see him, to show that he's doing OK and offer some kind of reassurance. As I'm told that over the coming weeks we're likely to see this sort of pattern, with him spending short amounts of time here in London before then heading to one of his homes in the countryside for some rest and recuperation.
So we've got 3 fans here from Windsor.
The public engagements are still down to Camilla, this time the worshipful company of fan makers, giving her a new title as an honorary liveryman. Funny, really, on a day that others with royal titles were being accused of exploiting theirs. Harry and Meghan launching their new website with a surprisingly regal look. Lots of mentions of Duke and Duchess and a royal coat of arms, all of which their team insists that they are entitled to use. Others think it's too much.
The power of their brand is obviously the royal heritage, you know, where Harry comes from, because that plays incredibly well in America. There doesn't feel to be any authenticity about this. They've returned back to something because everything else hasn't worked. Well, that's what it looks like.
If we needed a reminder of the attention that the royals can generate, the King's cancer diagnosis has been just that. The interest in which shows no sign of going away as he continues his treatment. Rhiannon Mills, Sky News at Buckingham Palace.
More than half a century ago, the United States won the space race to the moon, landing Apollo 11 back in 1969. Well, now the race is back on, and the target is once again the moon tomorrow. It is SpaceX Falcon 9 aiming for a lunar landing. Sky's science correspondent Thomas Moore has much more.
The Space Race 2.0 is underway, and once again, the moon is the prize. But this time, it's not about geopolitics, it's about water. Historically, moon missions have been dominated by the US and USSR, landing 19 times during the Cold War. Since then, China, India and Japan have made it to the surface. But so far, only India has braved the South Pole. And that's about to change. The region is covered in deep craters, permanently in shadow, perilous for a spacecraft, but it's worth the risk. Temperatures are as low as minus 230 degrees, easily cold enough to lock up water molecules as ice. NASA believes there could be hundreds of billions of gallons of water, but they need to make it into the craters to find out how much and whether it can be collected. Finding lunar water would be huge. Not only would it provide astronauts with crucial hydration, but splitting water molecules would produce oxygen to breathe and hydrogen for rocket fuel. Currently, it costs nearly £1 million to take 1 litre of water to the moon, so finding water would slash the cost of future missions. 3 US missions are due to land at the South Pole region this year. The first could launch as soon as Wednesday. The car-sized Nova Sea lander, built by the private US company Intuitive Machines, will test communications and navigational equipment needed for future missions. Then, in a few months' time, a second Intuitive Machines spacecraft will aim even further south, taking the first pictures inside a crater and drilling for ice below the surface. Finally, Astrobotic will launch their Griffin lander. It will carry NASA's Viper rover, which will set out on a 100-day scouting mission for water inside the Nobile crater. Following behind with missions planned for 2026 will be India, Japan and China. And NASA hopes to land astronauts at the South Pole in the same year, the start of a new era of human space exploration. And it all starts by finding water.
Now, there have been affectionate tributes this evening to the DJ Steve Wright, who was a mainstay of BBC Radio for more than 4 decades. He died suddenly at the age of 69. His last programme was broadcast only on Sunday. Our arts and entertainment correspondent, Katie Spencer, reports.
This is Steve Wright in the afternoon when we come back after.
A master of his craft, much more than a simple button-pressing radio DJ.
It's the big show, Steve Wright in the afternoon.
This was how the news of Steve Wright's death was announced by his colleagues at Radio 2.
We are all absolutely devastated and shocked and blindsided by this news. We've all lost a lovely friend who's been a big part of our lives for so many years.
He's died at the age of 69.
For those who worked with him, a real shock.
It's a tricky announcement to make. He was one of the true originals of music radio, I think.
He really has been part of everyone's life for so long. I mean, when our show ended in 22, you know, that was absolutely heartbreaking.
He had the most phenomenal on-air 3-hour show with the so-called zoo radio. And I said to somebody, I remember, how did he do that stuff? And they said, oh, when every free moment he gets, he goes to America and drives around America listening to different radio stations because he's so obsessed with radio.
Will you come through the keyhole? Steve Wright.
Steve Wright started working for the BBC back in the 70s, but got the big gig, a much coveted Radio 1 show in 1981. Moving subsequently to Radio 2, his long-running afternoon show, building a following for his zoo-style format, his ever-popular factoids interspersed with interviews with some of the biggest stars in the world. Awarded an MBE for his services to broadcasting, he was someone who refused to cut corners, something of a perfectionist who chose true craftsmanship over seeking the limelight.
How you doing? Shall we start then?
After 23 years, this was how he signed off from his last ever Radio 2 afternoon show.
We tried to make the show unique and just be good company. I can only hope that we've done that some of the time.
Witty, warm, a giant of broadcasting, who to many felt more like a friend. Katie Spencer, Sky News.
Now, a few weeks ago on my regular Friday night show, 7 till 10 p.m, do tune in, I spoke to Sven-Göran Eriksson. He told me his one wish was to manage Liverpool Football Club.
My father is still alive and he's still a Liverpool supporter. And I'm a Liverpool supporter as well. I've always been. So I always wished to be the manager of Liverpool. And that will not happen, for sure. But I'm still a Liverpool fan.
Well, it was confirmed today that the former England manager, who has terminal cancer, will now be taking charge of a team of Liverpool legends in a charity match against former Ajax players on the 23rd of March. Liverpool. I don't need a +1, just a ticket will do me fine. Thanks very much. Indeed, that was Sky News at 10. Coming up, we will be taking a first look at the papers in the press preview. Tonight, we're going to be joined by the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj. Among the stories we will be discussing, well, let's take a look at this one on the front of the Eye. Their headline, Starmer fights to limit damage after a second candidate rants about Israel. We're discussing that and the rest of the papers after this. Welcome back. In just a moment, the press preview, our first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. But first, our top stories this hour. And Sir Keir Starmer has suspended a second Labour Party candidate over comments about Israel, putting more pressure on the Labour leader over his handling of anti-Semitism in the party. Russia's ambassador to the UK has told Sky News his country has no interest in Poland or Baltic countries after Estonia's Foreign Intelligence Service claimed that Russia was preparing for a possible war with NATO. And tributes have been paid to the BBC radio DJ Steve Wright, who's died at the age of 69. Evening all, welcome to the press preview, our first look at the front pages as they arrive. Time to see what's making the headlines with the journalist and broadcaster Jenny Kleeman and the broadcaster and commentator Ali Miraj. They will be with us from now until just before midnight. With you guys in just a second. First, let's run through the front pages, beginning with the Eye. Its headline: Starmer fights to limit damage after second candidate rants about Israel. We'll be talking about that in a second. Same story for The Guardian, calling the Labour Party infighting turmoil. Here's the Financial Times. It reports that NATO is poised to announce that most of its member states are on track, to meet the target of spending 2% of GDP on defence. Concern, of course, has been mounting over whether the alliance might be forced into conflict with Russia. Here's the Metro. It says there's been criticism of the Duke and Duchess of Sussex for relaunching their website as the King undergoes cancer treatment. Here's the Mirror. It has coverage of the PC Sharon Beshinevsky murder court case. The Daily Star dedicating its front page to the BBC radio host Steve Wright, who died at the age of 69. Same story for The Sun. Their headline: Radio Wonder. Meanwhile, The Express questions what on earth is Britain coming to over pro-Palestinian protests outside the home of the Conservative MP Tobias Ellwood. Just a reminder, but by scanning the QR code you'll be seeing on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages whilst we discuss them. We are joined tonight by Jenny Kleeman and Ali Miraj. Lovely to see you both, and lots to talk about. So let's get started, and we'll begin on the front page of The Guardian. Who wants to take us away on this one? Labour in turmoil. I mean, who'd have thought it?
Well, yes. I mean, another day, another candidate with another set of comments that are creating another headache from Keir Starmer. He would have hoped that this would have all gone away. But apparently, in the same meeting as our Ali made those comments, which have meant that he is no longer going to be a Labour candidate in the Rochdale by-election, another prospective candidate, Graham Jones, made some comments that have resulted in him being suspended from the Labour Party. And this is such a problem for Keir Starmer.
Before we get there, though, what exactly has he said?
Well, we
need to be a little bit careful with the language that we use, but what has been said?
Well, he has said something which I think you would have to work quite hard to call it anti-Semitic, but he has said, and I'm going to sanitise my language here.
Please do.
He said during a meeting, and this is the same meeting, and it was in October, I'm sure when world leaders go home, like me, pardon my French, they say effing Israel again. And he also said that British people who want to fight for the IDF should be imprisoned. These are certainly anti-Israel comments, whether or not they're anti-Semitic. And here is the thing. So Keir Starmer today, when he was interviewed, repeated the word decisive over and over again. I've been decisive in all of this. I have decided that the time is right to no longer allow Azhar Ali to stand as a candidate for Labour. And he seems to have been incredibly decisive in this decision to suspend Graham Jones, who was going to be the candidate for Hyndburn. You could definitely make the case that what Graham Jones has said is not as abhorrent as what Azhar Ali said.
Ali, where are you in this? I mean, let's start actually with the three words the first three words of that headline there: Labour in turmoil. I mean, are they?
Well, it's certainly not good.
Not good, but are they in turmoil? Let's talk about the language use here.
Well, I think it's highly problematic for Starmer because, to be fair to Keir Starmer, he wanted to put clear blue water between, no pun intended, clear red water, whatever you want to call it, between himself and Jeremy Corbyn. He wanted to detoxify the Labour brand. He was very assiduous in doing that after that Equality and Human Rights Commission report that came out in 2020, which banged the Labour Party to rights. It had breached the Equality Act on 2 counts. There were a number of complaints made. There was also allegations of interference with how these complaints were handled. Starmer has really tried to take the Labour Party in a direction where it can rebuild relations with its Jewish voters. Now, in the middle of all this, you get this, it's a very fraught, very emotional time for a lot of people. And you've got Azhar Ali coming out to a bunch of Lancashire Labour activists saying that, and let's not forget what he said, that effectively, words to the effect of, Israel had orchestrated the killing of its own citizens, 1,200 of them, to then do what it wants in Gaza. I mean, really. Now, the interesting thing is, not necessarily that Azhar Ali's gone, which he absolutely should have. It's actually the fact that no one pulled him up in the meeting for these comments. And can I just say this? This is not news to me at all. I mean, the amount of times I have been to polite dinner parties in North London and been told that 9/11 was a Mossad plot, I cannot tell you.
But there is a difference between, you know, going to, and I'm picking a random part of North London here, for a dinner party, you're going to go to Islington for it. There's a difference between being around the bien-pensant and being a candidate for the Labour Party in the next general election. Does the vetting process, do they not now have to start over with pretty much everyone?
Yes.
I mean, go back to the drawing board.
Well, I mean, this is a real problem for Starmer because, first of all, anti-Semitism was a disaster for Labour, and also because, and as we know from the Conservative Party conference where Rishi Sunak was emblazoning the stage with the word change, focus groups have shown that what voters want is change, and this is something that Starmer always had on his side, that he could say, I have changed the Labour Party, I have rooted all of this out. And, you know, I'm trying to find polite ways of car crash, there's a word, car crash of how they've handled this. In Rochdale, there are going to be now 3 candidates on the ballot paper that are former Labour Party candidates. You have one in George Galloway, who is a Labour MP over 20 years ago. You have one in Simon Dantock, who was an MP 6 or 7 years ago. And then you have one who's going to have the Labour logo next to him, who, if you vote for him, he's not actually going to be representing the Labour Party.
Let's move on to, we can see the front of the eye. Sorry, Ali, carry on.
I was going to say, well, the thing is, what do we expect Starmer to do? He was slow in dismissing this guy and withdrawing support. He's done it now. He's been very quick with this Graham Jones guy. What else do we expect him to do? There are currents within the Labour Party that come out with this kind of nonsense. Now, they should not be standing for public office. Completely unforgivable, but they reflect a deeper issue in parts of the Labour Party and the populace at large, where conspiracy theories like this have some currency. Now, that should be worrying us all at a much deeper level.
What he should have done is acted really decisively on Sunday when all of this came out.
Yes, that's true.
No place for this.
That is true.
But the thing is, he was already on the ballot paper. You can understand what they're thinking, like, this is going to cause a huge problem.
The Galloway issue too,
Galloway issue is enormous.
Because Galloway's going to benefit from this. And remember that in 2005 in my constituency, Bethnal Green and Bow, he did get elected on the back of the Iraq War.
Yeah, he does. We should say George Galloway also saying he'll only be there for 200 days, you know, until the election.
Exactly.
But let's just, because of course we have been talking about the by-election in Rochdale, we should at this point bring up the voter list. Of course, this is after, of course, the point at which Labour withdrew its support for Azhar Ali. But let's move on to our next story, and this one is on the front of the Financial Times, and it's the timing of this that kind of gets me slightly, and it's slap bang in the middle there. Most NATO members are going to be hitting that target, the 2% of GDP that everyone who's a part of NATO is supposed to pay so that it shows their commitment. And it just so happens that we've got a US presidential election later this year that could put NATO's biggest enemy into the White House.
Yes, and that man...
And I said that advisedly, NATO's biggest enemy.
That man, Donald Trump, 2 nights ago, made a very, very incendiary and some would say ill-judged speech where he basically invited Vladimir Putin to attack any NATO country that did not pay 2% of GDP, which is, of course, deplorable. There's a word that shouldn't really be used in connection with Trump. But, you know, this idea that it's a transaction, the allyship of the US, and you pay up or you're harmed, is, I think, quite worrying. However, this rhetoric worked, it seems. It is spurred NATO into... it's going to announce, according to the Financial Times, that 2/3 of its allies will hit 2% of GDP this year.
Just on this, Ali, I mean, everyone always talks about it being Donald Trump that was the one that raised this with NATO. I mean, Obama was doing it. We've had US presidents since time immemorial.
He was.
He was the one that managed to get it onto the front pages and has managed to get people to increase their contributions as NATO member states, hasn't he?
Because he's been very stark about it. And look, there is no forgiving Donald Trump for coming out with things like, well, Russia should go and invade whoever it wants. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
But where he was bang on was, you can't keep basking under the umbrella of American security without paying up. And it's absolutely right. When you hear Emmanuel Macron, the French president, talking about strategic autonomy time and again, well, hang on a second, where's the beef? Where's the money? So actually, Jenny's absolutely right. Back in 2016, there were only 5 out of the 31 NATO members, well, I think there were fewer then, but the 5 of the relevant members members at the time that had actually paid 2%. Now it's 18 out of 31, and it's meant to be 2/3 by 2024. So what he said had an effect, and now they're going to be adopting a charm offensive, three-pronged. One, pay the money. Two, they're going to actually be trying to be much more polite to him. And three, also focus on China, which he's absolutely concerned about, which, again, he did warn about early.
I do want to move us on to the front of the Daily Express, because I think this is a story that is worth covering. Whoever wants to take us away here, but this is, of course, Tobias Ellwood, senior figure within the Conservative Party, former military man himself. His family has been besieged by people accusing him of being a war criminal. Someone's going to have to explain this to me.
Why is it Ellwood anyway? I mean, they could go after half the Tory party. They could go after the Prime Minister at Downing Street. I'm not sure what Tobias Ellwood's done particularly here. I mean, we know that Mike Freer, the MP for Finchley and Gold, has been standing down on the back of similar, let's say, verbal attacks or whatever. It's become very, very fraught. Look, people are passionate. Emotions are running high, but in such an environment, people need to act with decorum. You can make your point powerfully and clearly, but you can't be besieging someone's house. He's in the house with his kids, for heaven's sake.
Well, where does acceptable protest begin and unacceptable? Where does acceptable end and unacceptable begin? Because I think of, we've seen former senior politicians having their wedding days disrupted. Yeah. We've seen the Prime Minister's constituency home, people sitting up on the roof of it, and plenty of people are saying, well, we can protest where we like. I mean, if that is acceptable, why is this unacceptable?
Well, Section 5 of the Public Order Act says you shouldn't harass people. Yeah. And there is a point where protest becomes harassment. It's designed to intimidate people. And we know that MPs have been murdered in the past. And so turning up at people's homes and frightening their children doesn't sound necessarily like protest. I mean, we need to know more about exactly what was going on here. But there is a difference between trying to harass people into not doing their jobs or not speaking out and legitimately making a case. And you could argue that you would get a much bigger audience for what these protesters are calling for if you were not outside an MP's home.
Jenny's right. Look, MPs have died over this, right? So you remember Stephen Timms getting attacked. We had David Amess also being killed, Joe Cox. We take the security of our MPs in a far too lax manner. I know they want to be accessible to the public, but there are limits.
Guys, we are going to pause there. After the break, we're going to be discussing whether or not it is fair to criticise Harry and Meghan for relaunching their website whilst Harry's dad undergoes cancer treatment. We'll be discussing that next.
Great time for space exploration. It's the year of the moon. The first one was an American company that failed to get to the moon. The second one was a Japanese probe 2 weeks ago that worked but landed upside down. So this is a probe that's going to set off tomorrow. It's going to arrive next week. And hopefully it's going to arrive at the south pole of the moon, which is a very interesting place because it's a region where the sun never rises very much, so there are very dark shadows. In fact, some of the craters are in shadows all the time. They're the darkest place in the solar system. And in those craters, in those shadows, there's water. And this is part of the up-close prospecting for this water, because that's a valuable resource when people go to set up a base on the moon. It's a type of new space race in the sense that because of what Elon Musk did in opening up space to private companies and allowing people to launch at a reasonable cost, not only in the past because nations had to do this, now smaller companies can actually build a space probe like the ones going off tomorrow, and they can, if you like, put other people's payloads on it and fly payloads for NASA, for Europe, for anybody. And you've seen India, you've seen countries in Saudi Arabia, you've seen Japan, China. China is going back to the moon in April to return samples from the far side of the moon for the first time. And it's all part of surveying the moon or understanding the moon for the first people to go back there in over 50 years' time. It's getting further into the future. It was going to be later this year that 4 American astronauts would fly around the moon and do everything except the landing. But the problem with that is that Elon Musk's rocket, which is essential for this, because he's building the big rocket and the landing capsule, it's not ready. So that's been put back a year. So the human landing is at least a year after that, and probably several years further on. So we're talking 2028, 2029, which is interesting because there are rumours that China wants to put a person on the moon. And that's the timescale in which they could get their act together. So there is a real race now.
Welcome back to the press preview. Jenny and Ali still here. And we're going to go to the front of the Metro for our next story. And this is an interesting one. I mean, the headline's quite good, I have to say. A click in the teeth for Charles. Jenny, on you go.
So Harry and Meghan have rebranded themselves, supposedly. They have a new website, sussex.com.
Right.
Which replaces archwell.com. I think they had a production company called Archwell associated with their podcast, didn't do very well. And they had to set up Archwell because the Queen, his grandmother, wouldn't let them use sussexroyal.com. They're not supposed to use their titles, so they just used sussex.com. And people are angry about this.
What, the people of Sussex are annoyed about it?
People
or
who
more
don't
generally?
like Harry and Meghan are angry about it. You know, I'm not a massive fan of Harry and Meghan. I have to say the suggestion that this has been insensitively timed to coincide or otherwise with the King's diagnosis is, you know, these things take a long time to plan. I'm sure this is just a coincidence. I'm not sure it would help things otherwise if they had delayed it. I think some newspapers are determined to get very angry about Harry and Meghan. There are legitimate things to get angry about with Harry and Meghan. In my view, their website and its name isn't.
Well, I'm a bit perturbed by this because look, if I'm typing in the directions to Glorious Goodwood, now I'm going to be directed to their website.
The people of Sussex have a right to be
exactly.
angry.
The people of Sussex have a right to be angry. Look, I think this is. Firstly, I must congratulate them for changing their name from Archwell, which sounded like a US private equity firm.
Yes.
So at least
absolutely
that,
or management
not that I have anything
consultancy.
against, I have nothing against US private equity firms, but I'm just saying this is better branding. But I mean, on the website they're saying, show up, do good. It's like, is this an exercise in complete narcissism on the part of these two people? At the time when his sister-in-law's just come out of hospital, his father's like trying to put a brave face on and deal with his cancer diagnosis. There's a time and a place. Now's not it, is it?
All they have is their brand and their name. That's all they've got left. I'm happy to just give them this little URL because I feel so sorry for them now. That's all they've flogged every single horse that they have.
But I'm sorry to labour this point, but if, you know, they're not supposed to be using their titles, they're not supposed to be using their titles. I mean, the argument that seems to be coming back from their spokesman, their spokespeople, is, well, it's their name.
But also, why do they want to use their titles if it is so poisonous to be part of the royal family?
That's the only way they can monetize.
Well, exactly.
I do find it all rather unedifying, to be honest with you.
Well,
I mean, look, they're adults, they can do what they want and they can go and pursue the life they want. But I think there's a time and a place. I just think it's bad taste.
Let's then talk about, well, a man who's featured in all the papers tomorrow, but I have to admit I quite like the Daily Star's treatment of it. The BBC legend, Steve Wright, who's died at the age of 69. I mean, no matter if you've worked in our industry or not, you knew who Steve Wright was, and even if you weren't a fan of his, you had to admire the man's professionalism. He was always capable of producing good radio, which is a lot more difficult than it appears, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, I mean, the tributes today, not just from the BBC bosses who it seems, axed his show. He didn't seem to want to leave his afternoon show. But it's not just them who were gushing. Everybody was gushing today. He was a very loved person, by all accounts, a very nice person. And this is also really shocking. He signed off his show on Sunday, which was a pre-recorded show, but saying, see you next week. So he was only 69. He sounded quite a lot younger than 69. It's a real shock, I think.
It's been such a distinctive voice, Ali.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, 40 years, top of his game. And Jenny talks about the tributes coming in. They have been far and wide, particularly from broadcasters themselves, who regard him as one of the greats. So, you know, what can you say? The Beeb are upset about it, obviously, but all his fans are upset about it. And most importantly, the people who looked up to him as a true professional, as a broadcaster, really admire him, and rightly so.
I'm hoping that there is apparently another show that is in the can, as we say, which I cannot imagine that the BBC will release, but I am absolutely certain there will be an awful lot of material from the archives being put up over the next 24 hours, and rightly so. Guys, we will pause there. Much more from you, of course, in the 11 o'clock hour. Time for us, though. Take a look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
And the next few days will be mild or very mild, but I'm afraid it will be rather unsettled. A big temperature contrast to start with on Wednesday. Freezing up in the sheltered north, at double digits down in the southwest. Now, it will be rather grey through the morning with bands of rain spreading north and east, but northern Scotland will be largely fine. The south of Ireland, Wales and central England turning dry by lunchtime with some brightness possible. Very mild across central and southern parts. Expect further patchy rain during the afternoon, locally heavy, but hill snow is possible north of the Scottish Central Belt. Thursday brings further low clouds and outbreaks of rain.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Coming up next on Sky News at 11 o'clock, the pressure is mounting on Labour's Sir Keir Starmer over his handling of claims of anti-Semitism in his party.